All right. Hello, everybody. Hope you all are doing well. This is DFS Army's pre-lock show where we have a nice 7-game slate on deck. There's some interesting spots. We're getting news that's making things more interesting. And then we have quite a few wide spreads on the slate. We'll talk through it. It's end of the season NBA. I know a lot of people are focusing on NCAA, myself included. But there's still some money to be made. Let's talk about last night. Last night was a struggle. It was tough. You can't win every night. Night before we crushed. One before that wasn't as bad as last night, but wasn't great. And then Monday was awesome. It was pretty good. So, 2 for 2. Want to end the week strong. I feel like this is an interesting slate. So let's see where we land. But last night. So Trey Jones was a guy who was in the nut line. Again, look, we talked about that Chicago-Sacramento game. We liked the environment. Trey Jones wasn't someone I took a shot on just because I thought there were some better plays from the Lakers side. Obviously not true, but he was very viable. Zaire Williams was someone that I wasn't on at all, but he crushed last night. Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, those are two guys who are relatively low-owned, and we did force exposure to them. Miles Turner was also in the nuts line. B-Dub mentioned that he was forcing exposure to him. Kevin Huerter, wasn't looking at him at all, but he was in that game that we liked. Mathurin was someone that we forced exposure to, and then Scotty Barnes showed his face a little bit last night in the nuts line. So, like I said, didn't do great. We hit on some low-owned plays. It was really just a chalk that didn't come through for us. Wouldn't have changed anything. Sometimes shit like that happens. Rodney, what's up? Cujo, Marquise, David, good to see y'all. Let's make it happen today. Starting off, we have the Magic going up against the Wizards. Fantastic matchup here. And we just got the news that Cole Anthony is out. So that's a nice increase in usage for guys like Paolo and Franz primarily. The DS loves these guys. I didn't have to do much to them. Paolo is showing up in 86% of my lines just naturally without doing anything. And I like Paolo. Sim Model liked him as well. Not really much else to say. It's the Wizards. I'm not going to overthink that one. Franz, I have a 30% min on. I like Paolo significantly more, but we know Franz is that guy who can sometimes just, when you're expecting Paolo to go off, sometimes it's a Franz night. We haven't seen too many of those recently, but he's someone that still has plenty of upside in a soft matchup that I'm willing to force exposure to him here. And then Wendell Carter Jr. at 4,700. He just makes a lot of your lines work. He's been playing more consistent minutes. I have a 12% min on him, just kind of making sure he's in the mix with some of the other value that's on this slate. I wouldn't say it's a slate that has fantastic value, and so that's kind of why I want to mix them in. And then KCP is purely a sim model play. He plays a ton of minutes, but he rarely does anything out there. I'm always comfortable taking shots on guys like this in softer matchups and when the sim model likes them. So 2% min there, nothing crazy. And then that's pretty much it for me with the Magic. They tend to really focus their core players on playing a lot of minutes and having high usage rates. Everyone else is kind of just a body. On the other side of things, we have the Washington Wizards going up against the Magic. We know the Magic are a good defensive team, not one we like to pick on too often. For the stars from Washington, I'm not looking at them at all in this matchup. I don't trust any of them typically, and when it's not a soft matchup, you're just not going to find me taking shots on them. AJ Johnson, Vukcevic, and Colby Jones are 3 plays that stood out for me a little bit in the sim model. Like I said, there's not great value, but just due to some of the injury news we have, I do think there's better value on the slate, so I'm not going to force exposure to them. But I did put a like on them, just kind of encouraging the DS, like, hey, bump their projection just a bit, and they still are not showing up for me at all, which I'm fine with. I'm not going to force the issue any more than that. As I do more runs, as we get closer to lock, there's a chance I might get 1-2% or a little bit more than that if the DS decides to do that. But as of right now, they're not in my lines. And if you guys are interested in joining DFS Army, feel free to click the link in the description. Promo code BOB for a 10% discount there. And then you'll also have access to the Discord and the cheat sheets. A lot of really good stuff happening there too, with a lot of great advice there. Next up, we have the 76ers going up against the Spurs. highest game total on the slate, which you all know what that means for me. I'm looking for reasons to play guys from this team, which is gross because both of these two both of these two teams suck. Like they are bad. But high game total, close spread too, which is not something we can say a lot on this team or on this slate. So I'm looking to force exposure here. And it's ugly. You're not going to feel good about these guys. We have Quentin Grimes. We have a 15% min on him. The sim model liked him, and really ever since the start of this week, when the sim model's on him and he's in a soft matchup, I'm willing to take some shots here. I have a 15% min on him. He's pricey, but he's been paying off that price, and especially against a bad defense, he's the one who leads usage rates here. If this game stays close, he should be able to get there for us. Lonnie Walker, I hate, but sim model liked him, so I put a 15% min on him in a soft matchup. He's seeing consistent minutes here, so felt like it was worth a shot on a slate where we don't have amazing value, in my opinion. Jarrett Butler, again, just another guy who's seeing pretty solid minutes, second highest usage rate on this team if you're not counting some guys who don't see as many minutes. And so he's just someone else I wanted to force a little bit of exposure to here in a soft matchup. Justin Edwards, rinse, wash, repeat. Very similar to Lonnie Walker. Not my favorite player in the world, but in a high total game, I'm just going to force exposure here. What's up, Jay? Good to see you, man. Let's see here. And then let's see. Do any other Sixers show up? We have the Grimes exposure, Walker, Butler, Edwards, and that's it. Again, not really trying to get too cute on this one. It feels relatively straightforward at this point. All right, now the Spurs side of things is a little interesting and weird. Part of the reason for it is just because of some of the guys they have out. Fox, Bassey, Victor, all those are long-term injuries, but in a soft matchup and with the minutes getting a little weird here more recently, I'm willing to force some exposure. Castle, I have a 30% min on. He just wasn't showing up enough for me after I made some other adjustments. Vassell, I have a 25% min on. He just makes a lot of sense for me on this slate. Another guy, high total game. I just want exposure here. Mamu, he doesn't see a lot of minutes. He crushed last time out in that blowout. You have to imagine they will give him more run when he's performing like that, but at this point, they're not playing for much. I put a 7% min on him. Sim model liked Sandro. I felt like it was worth a shot. Just trying to get a little bit of exposure there, but obviously not a play I feel great about. Sohan, Jeremy, man. Sohan, I get so frustrated by this guy. I've been on him a decent amount this season. He finally started to see a few more minutes last time out, and so now he's projecting well because he's a pretty solid points per minute player. And so as long as he's getting those minutes, he should be able to get there for us, especially at 5,100 in a soft matchup. I did put a 90% exposure maximum on him just because he was showing up in 99% of my lines, and that's just not necessary for me on this slate. He is a very strong play, though, and he makes complete sense, and I like him. I'm going to be over the field. Keldon Johnson, similar story here. He's been very involved in the offense, though, just not the most consistent player. But in a soft matchup, good game environment, I'm going to make sure I'm over the field on him. And he's showing up in 47% of my lines, so some decent leverage there. And then Blake Wesley was standing out a little bit for me in the sim model at 3,100. But even with the like, he's not showing up at all in the DS. And so I'm not going to force the issue there. He's not someone to fight for, typically, in my book. Low usage guy. Just hard to get excited about. And that's it. I like the Spurs. I like the Sixers. I don't like the players themselves, but I like the environment. And so I'm always just going to kind of follow that. Jay said, I'm late, but I'm here. Who the locks? No locks yet, Jay, but I see you. Thanks for joining, man. Andrew said, I'm taking Grimes for sure. Yeah. Like at this point, you just kind of have to take that shot in soft matchups. It's hard seeing that price tag next to his name, but I'm just going to do it. Next up, we have the Rockets going up against the Heat. This is a spot that was a lot more interesting, or would have been a lot more interesting if Amon wasn't playing. But with Amon coming back tonight, we don't really know how much run he'll see, but it definitely is a big hit to Eason, big hit to guys like Brooks, who do stand out for me in the sim model, and I would be more excited to take a shot on them, again, like if Amon wasn't playing. And in a tough matchup against the Heat, hard for me to get overly excited about that. Jalen Green has been really good over the last few games. Again, in a tough matchup, it's just hard for me to find reasons to play these guys over some of the other spots on this slate. I don't think it's dumb if you do play them. I think Easton's probably a little expensive for his upside at this point with Thompson playing, but I can still get behind a Brooks play or a Jalen Green play if that's where you're leaning already. But I'm not doing it. Let's see. Make sure they're not showing up. Yeah. No Rockets are showing up naturally at this point. On the Heat side of things, I feel like we've had them a decent amount this week, and they're always in these ugly game environments. And then there's always a couple of players who keep showing up. I still don't like them, especially in a tough matchup against the Rockets. None of these guys stand out in the sim. None of them stand out from a matchup standpoint, and none of them stand out from a projection standpoint. They're not showing up in my lines. Only Tyler Hero around 1%, 2 lines. I'm not going to force the issue here with him, but I'm not expecting much from the Heat tonight. Hornets against the Thunder in a 20.5-point spread. Freaking crazy. It makes sense, though. You know, LaMelo's not playing tonight, which is unfortunate because it means we kind of have to consider some of these Hornets if this game stays close and or if this game, you know, does blow out the way it's supposed to. I have a 10% min on Miles Bridges, really just trying to get some exposure to the guy who sees the highest increase in usage with LaMelo out. Matchup is freaking brutal, but it just makes sense for me from a usage rate perspective. And again, like if this game doesn't play out the way the spread does, Bridges will be a more than likely a really big piece of that. If you don't like the 10% min, I think you can do like 5 or 6 and be fine. Josh Green was a play that stood out for me in the sim model. With LaMelo out, I'm more open on taking shots on players like Josh Green, kind of like your 3-and-D type of player. 2% min on him. Not someone I'm overly confident in. You don't expect a lot out of him typically, but willing to take a shot. KJ Simpson is showing up a lot by himself. He's a high points per minute player. We're not expecting too many minutes out of him. Not someone that I'm jumping up and down to play. Part of the reason why I'm keeping an eye and making sure he's not going to be like a core player or anything like that. But he is showing up in my lines around 25%. I am still under the field, and I don't like him enough where I'm willing to force exposure to him. But not a bad play at 3,800. Diabot, the sim model, did like a little bit more than Simpson. And at 9% ownership, I'm more willing to kind of find reasons to play a guy like him who we've seen be super volatile, but still have some signs of upside, which is what I'm shooting for, you know, to take down a GPP. So at 3,800, I have a like on Diabot, and he's only showing up in 1% of my lines. And we'll talk about why that's the case. And then before we talk about Nurkic, we will look at Wendell Moore Jr. Again, just another viable 3K player who's seeing 20 plus minutes. He's not showing up for me, I don't believe. And again, that's fine. He's just a sim auto play in a tough matchup. Didn't stand out enough for me to want to force exposure to him, but still worth mentioning. Nurkic is basically the play of the slate. His minutes are getting a little bit more consistent. He still always makes me nervous when I see him on a slate, but golly, the minutes haven't gotten more consistent. But he typically does play more in these spots when LaMelo was out. And at 3,700, assuming he does see those 25 to 28 minutes, we can expect him to come through for us there. It does make me nervous. I would make sure I don't want like 80% plus of a guy like Nurkic, but I'm okay with the 70% exposure I have. Completely aware of the risk that's involved. Same thing with Sohan. It's going to be a very similar situation with Hawkins, and Keldon Johnson's in a similar boat for me too. like I said, we have solid value, not great value. So I'm comfortable just having a mix of these guys and trusting the DS on just how much is given me of them. All right, next up we have the soft matchup, but because it's such a wide spread, it's hard to trust these guys. SGA is coming back from an injury. He's been out for about a week and a half or so, maybe a little bit longer. Matchup solid here going up against the Hornets. That's part of why the spread is so wide, but golly, it's really hard to get excited about OKC. Let me get some water here. Don't shy. Cason Wallace is questionable. And so if Cason Wallace gets rolled out, we're more excited about some of these Thunder plays. Maybe like Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins, or just much more viable. But as of right now, none of these Thunder guys are showing up for me. And it's a similar situation with Tatum. Like when you look at the pay-up options, there's SGA, there's Tatum, and just really good, solid matchups, but they're not even that low owned. They're like 21%, 14%. And then we have guys like Cade and Paolo who are just in much better spots, and even Ant, who are cheaper. And again, like the ownership is close to double, but honestly, it should be a little bit higher, in my opinion. So I am going to like force a little bit of exposure to SGA and Tatum just to add them in my mix. But because we know they have slate breaking upside, I want to give myself a chance to have some lines that are alive. But fading those two players tonight, I don't think is a bad call. David, give some love to FanDuel, Bob. More specifically, the last 3 games, please. I got you. Give me a second. Let me look at this right quick. When I was going through the games, there's a few players that stood out for me. And for FanDuel, specifically from the Clippers, guys like Kawhi Leonard, Zubac are in great spots going up against Memphis. Really, really, really bad defense. And then the other play is a bit more obvious from those games. Aaron Gordon, wherever he is, stood out for me a little bit as well. So no full breakdown, but a little bit of something. Jay, I'm going to keep Nurkic right at 70%. If he goes higher than that, I'm going to put a max on him, but I like him being at 70. With him being 30% owned, that's still decent leverage. I'm going to keep a close eye out on the ownership or the projected ownership on Nurkic, because if that increases, then I'll have to get off of that. I don't want more than 70% hill, So gotta watch. Tattoo, what's up? I wouldn't trust someone. Tattoo, you almost got me to say it. I'm not gonna do that one, but I'm with you. All right. So yeah, 5% min on SGA. I'm gonna take more of a wait and see approach on the Thunder. Again, if Wallace gets ruled out, some of these guys will end up playing tonight, for better or worse. All right, things get a bit more interesting moving forward, but the spreads don't get smaller. So there's that. We have the Pelicans going up against the Timberwolves. Zion is out, which is, of course, a boost to CJ McCollum. Matchup is brutal here going up against the Timberwolves. You can always make the case that you can shoot threes against good defense. That happens, and so I can understand the CJ McCollum play. Like I said earlier, though, I just really prefer Paolo and Cade, and so 7,100 at the guard spot, I would much rather have Cade there and pay down elsewhere. So it was hard for me to prioritize him on the slate, but again, it's not a dumb play. Kelly O stood out for me in the sim model, but just given some of the value we've gotten and guys like Nurkic starting to pop a bit more, hard for me to prioritize Kelly O at his price tag. Missy was a sim model play. He stood out a little bit. I don't believe he's showing up for me at all. And I don't like him enough to force it. A player I do like enough to force exposure to is Bruce Brown. He's just been really good recently with the minutes stabilizing, and his shot's been a bit more consistent. Like I said, tough defensive matchup, but historically you can shoot threes against good defense, or you still they still have solid upside even at Like, yeah, I think you guys get what I'm saying. You can shoot threes against good defense historically, and so I'm going to force 15%, a 15% min on Bruce Brown, hoping he can keep that performance up. 4,100 shouldn't kill me too much one way or the other, and 15% also won't hurt too much. Jordan Hawkins, man, I feel like for like the last 2 years we've been fighting ourselves with him, and he's really, really cheap. No Zion, we expect him to be out there a bit more. Matchup's tough, but he's too cheap to avoid. And so even though I don't love him just because he has burned us in the past, we're only expecting 21, 23 points here. Let me look a little bit closer at some of his more recent performance. Oh, and Cason Wallace is a very viable play if he does play tonight. So he's someone I am willing to force exposure to, depending on that news. Could be a little sneaky. Yeah, Jordan Hawkins, I just can't stand, man. Even when he sees solid minutes, sometimes he just sucks and his usage rate is so low. But at 34% ownership at that price tag, I just can't. And like I said, I don't really love too many value options on this slate. It's just a slate where I have to ride with it and hope he comes through. And he's shown some upside before in the past. It's just been a little bit. He had a 41-point performance against Phoenix like a month ago when he saw 31 minutes. Phoenix, they're not great against guards, though, so it was a bit of a softer matchup. Outside of that, we haven't really seen too many high upside games, but again, just going to ride with it here. Let's see. Next up, we have the fun side of this game, the soft matchup. Again, the spread is wide, so there's a chance some of these guys won't see the full run we would expect them to or want them to at their price tags. Those guys are really, for me, Anthony Edwards and even Mike Conley at 3,600. If this game blows out quickly, they aren't as viable or they just don't have the same chance of getting to the upside we want them to have on this slate. But because it's a soft matchup and their ownership isn't high, it's worth it for me to force exposure to these soft spots. So I have a 13% min on Anthony Edwards. I have a 5% min on Jaden McDaniels. That was more of a sim model play. We can look a little bit closer at that too. And Rudy Gobert, 6,100. I have a 10% min on him. And Naz Reid at 5,700. I like Naz Reid. I'm probably going to increase Naz Reid to 15% actually, because even if the game does blow out, he'll still see a little bit more run than some of these other guys. And so, yeah, I like the Timberwolves tonight. I wish the spread was a little bit closer so I wasn't as nervous about it, but Ant has been in great form. That's really the main reason I forced exposure to him, too. And it's just such a soft matchup. John, I have no clue if he's going to play. I really just kind of take a wait-and-see approach. And then if he ends up getting ruled out, we late swap. And if he's not, I don't late swap. So I don't have a great answer for you there, to be honest. Tattoo said, if I was you, I'd so 18%. See, I don't know what you're trying to say. That's not okay, but I know it's something. And so that's why I'm just like, I have to say it slowly and hopefully I'm avoiding the bad part. Let's see here. Yeah, that's pretty much. I do have a 5% min on Mike Conley just because he does start for them. He hasn't been playing as many minutes, but in a soft matchup, I'm willing to take a shot, and Sim Model liked him as well. So yeah, let's look at the Sim Model right quick. Rudy Gobert and Jaden McDaniels first, 6,500, 6,100. 6,500. Jaden McDaniels. 0.11% chance of hitting 6.5x his value. Not super high, but just in comparison to other guys in his price range, stood out a little bit. I mean, Michael Porter Jr., talking about that Denver game, stands out a bit more. And then Terry Eason stands out a lot more, but some of that data is coming from when Amen was out. He's still, like I said, not an awful play. It's just a lot thinner of a play for me, so I couldn't find a great reason to take a shot on Eason, unfortunately, even though we've been playing him a good bit recently, and he's been crushing for us. So that was Jaden. Let's look at Rudy right quick at 6,100. 4.81% chance of hitting 6.5x value. the sim model always has a bit of a hard-on for Rudy Gobert, so I don't take it too seriously, but with it being a soft matchup, and he's been, struggling a bit recently, this feels like a decent bounce back spot for him, where I like, forcing exposure to him. And then the last guy we mentioned, if the spread was closer, I would be double the field and he would be a leverage play. And then Nas Reed, or no, it was Mike Conley at 3,600. One thing you'll see is just like there's a lot of high value consistency guys when you start to go lower. This dark green is Nurkic. That's part of why I'm not going to tinker with him too much. But 3,600, Mike Conley has 6.44% chance of hitting 7x's value tonight. So those are decent odds. He's literally 5%. That's like 1% of an edge off of like his percentage of reaching the value we need to take down a GPP. Feels gross just given his minutes, but it made sense for me just given his ownership. Let's see here. All right, for the Pistons, like I said, this is where it gets interesting. The Mavs are a bad defense. Relatively close spread here. Second highest total game on the slate. This is a game just like that Sixers Spurs game. I'm looking for reasons to play guys here. There's a lot of reasons to think about why I shouldn't, but I'm not going to. I'm trying to find reasons to play these guys. So Cade Cunningham, awesome play tonight. He's showing up naturally in about 46% of my lines. I'm not going to put a min on him yet unless he falls a little bit more. I do want to be above 40% on Cade tonight. And we know, like, I think he burned us earlier this week and then he crushed after that. That happens in DFS. I don't really overthink those situations too much. Jalen Duren, I love playing bigs against the Mavs. It's something that we've been doing for a while, and I plan on continuing to do that. And then Tobias Harris has not been the best recently, but in a soft matchup, he has consistent minutes, and that's what I'm really trying to aim for is these guys who are in spots where they will or have a chance to perform better than they typically do. At relatively low ownership, just given their game total, 20% min on Harris, 10% min on Beasley. Again, untrustworthy player, but has upside. 15% min on Asar. We're going to boost that to 16%. And Asar is really just a sim-model play at 4,300 in a soft matchup. 6.2% chance of hitting 7x value tonight. Case and Wallace, it likes a little bit as well. Hence, like why I mentioned Wallace earlier. But Asar Thompson, 6.2%. Those are solid numbers, and we know he has upside. So, given the soft matchup, the minutes aren't where we want them to be, but that's why he's 4,300. It makes sense for me. And then the guy I really don't feel the best about, but I like mixing him in as like a value play, Isaiah Stewart, solid points per minute player in a soft matchup, another big. He can go out there and put up a stinker, like maybe 10 points or so, but he can also do a little bit more for us, 20, 23 points. So I have a 3% min on him, nothing crazy. And then exposures, pretty much exactly where I have the mins at besides Cade. Yeah, nothing too crazy here. But I like the Pistons a good bit. The Mavs side of it is kind of gross. PJ Washington has the best matchup for me. He's going to be a leverage play for me tonight. He was awful last time out. Sim-Model liked PJ Washington last time out too, but I didn't like the matchup, so I didn't force exposure to him. So got lucky on avoiding that one. But today, I'm more willing to do it. He's significantly lower owned than he was on that last slate too, so it's pretty easy for me to get double the field on him. And so I put a 24% min on PJ. Again, is really just a game total that's standing out for me here. And kind of like the Wallace is available to play, a bit of a buzzkill. But it does go straight to my point, just like that. Where's Wallace? I'm just going to put a 7% min on him, adding him into the mixture of value options on the slate. Should play plenty of minutes tonight. And so, yeah, PJ's a leverage play. And then Kai Jones sucks. He's 5,100. If he was cheaper, before we had like all the value pop up, I thought he was a bit more interesting, but I'm not going to go there on this slate. It's just going to be PJ for me. I can't really look at anyone else. The Pistons typically aren't a team you'll want to pick on too much. The Celtics, Jaylen Brown is still out. This is still a super soft matchup for the Celtics, though. I don't like Jason Tatum. I'm going to be under the field on him, but I'm still going to have some lines with him in. That's why I put a 10% min on him. Matchup's just too good for me to have no exposure. 3% min on Pritchard. Semi liked him. A higher chance of upside when guys like Brown are out. Jrue Holiday has just been in really good form. His usage rate's increasing as we continue to go throughout the season. Part of that has to do with Jaylen Brown being out, but at 5,500 against a really bad Jazz team, not super chalky. I like forcing exposure to him. I have a 10% min on Jrue. I don't trust him or Pritchard, but at their low ownership, it's worth a shot for me. And then the Celtics just aren't going to show up naturally for you. Given that spread, it's hard, and given their price tags, it's hard to get overly excited about any of them. And then the Jazz are the Jazz, going up against a good defense. These guys haven't stood out for a while, and they're not going to today. Jay, for me, I'm not like you. I usually don't force exposure to the hammer game unless I really like the matchup, and I do like it enough for Jrue and Pritchard, but Tatum's a little tough. I don't feel like you have to force exposure to the hammer game, but yeah, I just don't feel like you do. I am, but it's not necessary. Who are you forcing, Jay? I'm curious. I really just can't look at the Jazz side either. They've just been crazy with minutes. None of their players have been overly good. There's a few games where we're probably going to have just some random value option who sees more minutes in a blowout tonight just because there's so many wide spreads, but we'll see. So that's pretty much me for this slate, y'all. Happy to answer any questions if any more come through, but I think it should be an interesting one. Let me refresh and do one more run before I go. Ooh, White. White's a guy who sees a nice increase in usage with Brown out. I don't hate that. The hard part for me is just the 7,700 piece. That mid range, that the 7 to like 9K range today is like pretty solid. Derek White's one of the stronger options here. I decided to kind of take the shot on PJ, but I think Derek White's just as viable. Jalen Green's interesting in that like low ownership range, but again, with Amon back, I'm just less excited about that entire team. I ultimately decided to just kind of focus on the mid-range today with guys like Paolo, Grimes, Miles, Bridges, but bruh, I get it. Tattoo, why are you going Goga? I feel like every time you're here, you're always trying to play Goga. Don't play Goga. Actually, I'll look at him just for you. I'll give him a look. Okay, 3,500. Don't play Goga. Don't play Goga, Tattoo. You don't need him. You don't need him today. You can play Nurkic. Nurkic is like a very viable big who should see 28 minutes. Okay, let's look at the exposures before we wrap up. We have Sohan, Banchero, 86%. Hawkins still showing up a good bit. Nurkic is showing up a lot. Keldon Johnson, 47%. I would like Cade to be a little bit higher than Keldon, like ideally around 50%, but I don't care enough where I'm gonna tinker that out. I might see what it looks like if I take the like off of Keldon Johnson. That might make it happen naturally. All of those Spurs project pretty well. I gotta make sure. Yeah, I have exposure to all of them. Okay, good. With Amon playing, it just makes everything gross for the Rockets. Have we gotten any more news? Oh yeah, we got the clarification that Amon will play, and he won't have a minutes restriction. Oh man, yeah, that seems a little gross tonight. Wake me up before you Goga. Tattoo. Oh, okay, that's good. That's good. I'm glad we got you off of him. Watch him go off. No, I just don't think that's gonna happen. So Paolo's showing up a bit more for me now in this last run. KJ Simpson is showing up even more in this last run. I'm going to take a little bit of a closer look at him. Like I said, some of these value options just feel and sound gross. I just like to look a little bit closer at them to make sure I like them before I let them show up in all of my lines. And even if I don't, I just have to make sure I don't hate them. If I hate them, that's when I'm like, okay, we're going to put a max on them and lower it. But I'm okay with KJ. Yeah. Simpson's been solid. And at his price, yeah, 3,800. He put up 30 against Golden State, Brooklyn, Detroit. These are like solid defenses, like 26, 25. And we have him projected for 26. Yeah, I'm comfortable with him. Obviously, just because it worked out before in the past doesn't mean it will work out again, but he's very viable. He'll be a core play for sure. And that lowered my exposure to Hawkins, who I didn't really like that much anyway. And Keldon fell off the face of the earth. Not what I wanted, but let me see. Yeah, I'm going to, I don't feel like I have to force 20% exposure to him, but I'll do like 15, 16. I'll put a 16% min on Keldon Johnson just to make sure I'm close to field weight exposure. I just might have liked him. I'm so comfortable being over the field or close to field weight. I just trust some of these other guys a bit more. Yeah, I feel a bit better about what we have here. Banchero, Sohan, Nurkic, Simpson, Franz is showing up as a core play right now for me. Equal ownership to Hawkins. I like that. Cade solid. And then we even have like a little bit of Tatum, a little bit of SGA, guys I don't love, but just adding them into the mix just in case they go off in soft matchups. It's a good game plan for me. Sweet. All right, y'all. Well, appreciate the support. If y'all could hit the like button, always appreciate that. But if not, ideally, I'll see y'all on Monday. Good luck tonight. Peace out. Have a good weekend.